today because we have one of our favorite guests with us. That is the amazing Tim Enlow, and he's been on the podcast a couple times, and he's back with us today to get a little caught up on what's going on the border. And Stephanie and I talk about the border frequently, but when we can get firsthand information like this, it's a whole new ball game. So, welcome back, Tim.
Great. Good to see you guys, and really happy to be back on the podcast.
Can you briefly just give a little background on yourself for people that may not have heard our previous episodes with you?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, after high school, I joined the military, spent about 5 years on active duty, a couple more years in the National Guard. And then after that, I went into law enforcement. I spent about 11 and a half, roughly about 11 and a half years in law enforcement, deputy sheriff, city police officer in Austin, and then as a federal air marshal. And that kind of led into me being offered to go work overseas as a independent contractor protecting American diplomats over in Iraq and Afghanistan. I did that for about 7.5 years and over there. And then now I'm here in the States kind of doing security work for like high net worth individuals and things like that.
And what takes you to the border?
Well, the border's always been a passion of mine. Back in the 1980s, after I'd gotten out of the U.S. Army, I was offered the opportunity. The cartels were just kind of like starting to come into their own down there, and so the National Guard here in Texas started a drug task force, which was it was called Task Force Guardian. It was made up of National Guard soldiers working together with Border Patrol and U.S. Customs at the time to try to do drug interdiction down at the border. And this was in the late 80s. And so I went down there then because I cared about all the drugs that were coming across. And back then it wasn't near the violence associated with it that we're seeing today. And so after that, living here in Texas, I've just always followed the border, but especially here, in the lead up to the 2020 election and things, we started spending more and more time on the border as these huge surges of humanity started coming across the border. And that's really something we had not seen since the Mariel boat lift, with the Cubans in Florida. And but we hadn't seen, we knew people were coming across, and throughout the 80s and 90s they would trickle across. And back then a surge was, a group of 75 or 100, running across the freeway in California or something. That was considered a surge back then, but not 15,000 Haitians trying to come across, or like the millions and millions that we're seeing now.
Yeah. Well, and for anyone that didn't listen to the previous episodes, I really encourage them to go listen because Tim, like for me, it really helped me see like the humanity behind what's happening because you hear all these big numbers and it's hard to picture like what's really going on. And you gave some really crazy stories of like that woman that runs like the church group or whatever, and
Right.
then some guy from Chicago comes down and it's like, I need two women that I'm going to take with me to Chicago to work for me. And it like opened my eyes to just how easily people are human trafficking. And so I really think that people should go and listen, to that aspect of it. But what I want to ask this time around, like in your more recent trips to the border, are you seeing more of these like Chinese young military aged men? Because we hear reports of this. We hear like that a lot of people coming over, it's not so much families, it's mostly like military aged men. Is that what you're seeing in your own experience?
Yes. So I just went down to Eagle Pass about 3 weeks ago. I was down in Eagle Pass, and that was right before the trucker convoy went down there, right, to protest the border. It was before Trump and Biden went down to the border. And we spent, I want to say, 4 to 5 days down there in Eagle Pass. And yes, so a lot of military age males. Yes, that is correct. We did see that. However, there are still also a lot of unaccompanied children coming across. And, I talked to Border Patrol about that. I talked to a spokesman down at Camp Shelby, which is the National Guard camp that took over the city park down there in Eagle Pass. And, they're seeing still a lot of that. And one of the most, you talk about humanity. One of the things that really got to me was that the National Guards people we spoke to told us that a number of their personnel actually requested transfer because now these children that are coming across, they are being recycled, if you can believe this. So what they were saying is these kids would come across, the cartels would give these kids drugs. They come across, I'm talking about drugs to ingest, not drugs
Oh
to
my
to
God.
even smuggle across, right? And so these kids come over, they're addicted to drugs. The National Guard would sit there and take them into detain them and try to work with them and try to get them help for their drug addiction, right? And then, of course, the Border Patrol would release them into the United States, okay? And 2 weeks later, these National Guards people are seeing the same kids come back across the border into their camp. Okay. So these kids are literally being recycled, and the cartels use them for a number of purposes within the US. They use them as runners, they use them as scouts, they use them to transport, they use them to drive cars to pick up other illegals because they know they're juveniles and that the criminal justice system here in the US will, if they do anything, at worst, they'll go to a juvenile detention center and they'll be right back out again. Right. And so it was just dealing with some of these kids. It was stressing out some of these National Guard members so bad psychologically, and seeing the exploitation that they wanted to transfer. They didn't want to deal with the kids, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know how
So
you deal with that without going crazy when there's
right,
nothing you
week
can do
after
about it,
week, and
really.
right, absolutely right. So we're seeing that. Besides the many men, we're seeing that. Um, so it's the problem on the border's only gotten worse, and we kind of talked about that before we start rolling. Is it's only gotten worse down there, and some of the things that we were told and that we saw, and the thing about this is almost exclusively all these border patrol agents, they all want to work with us. They all want to, when you pull one to the side and they feel like they can speak in safety, right, without their supervisor around, it's like the floodgates open. These border patrol agents that are working the border, and the National Guard people, they are so frustrated by what is going on and what they're seeing and what they're having to do down there at the border, and they're just more than willing to provide information like that. It just comes flooding out of them, right? Because they've been holding this inside for so long. And the truth is, many of them nowadays, they don't trust the mainstream media. They don't trust that, CNN or NBC or any of these big mainstream medias, that they're gonna tell the truth about what the Border Patrol agent told them, and B, that they'll keep their identity, discreet and confidential.
Right.
And, when we went down there, we were very fortunate. It was funny. We were filming on the side of the road, and Border Patrol agents actually stopped and approached us and would just like slide us their number and say, "Hey, can you call us? I can't talk here because my supervisor might drive by, but can you talk to us later on? Can we talk later on? I've got information to share with you." And they would just pour out, because they're just so frustrated on what's going on down there.
You know what would be cool? I mean, it sounds like you're already doing this, but like creating an anonymous network where they can, talk and you relay that or you post it anonymously, but so
Right.
people can get a firsthand account. And
I
like,
agree.
okay, so Eagle Pass, that's where Abbott stepped in, right? And
That's
you have the
correct. Yes.
National Guard. And I did hear one of the reporters was saying that like um even though the mainstream news made it sound like there was this face off between the Border Patrol and the National Guard, that really they're all buddies and like the Border Patrol is
Right.
kind of like cheering them on. Is that what you're kind of saying? Like they're all on the same They
Oh,
all have the same.
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I actually interviewed the National Guard spokesman down there, and but also we were actually allowed inside Camp Shelby. So we got to go and look at their tactical operations center. We got to look at everything that they have down at Camp Shelby. And absolutely the Border Patrol, and not just the Texas National Guard. We have other governors who have sent National Guard troops down there, and that's what even the Border Patrol agents told me this. They're like, listen, this stuff in the news that we're at a standoff with the national, that's all BS. Like we love these guys and they love us. And yeah, they had a terrific camaraderie down there. And yeah, absolutely. There was no tension. There was nothing like that. That was all just posturing by the media and the politicians. But on the ground, that just wasn't the case. Everybody was there to do a job, and they were all working together. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've talked extensively about how, Biden is basically saying that Texas isn't letting the Border Patrol do their job. And then I see articles where the Border Patrol Union president, Brandon Judd, is speaking out. And I applaud him for actually saying that's not the case. Like, we are trying to do our job, and it's not Texas that's preventing us. And so, have you had any interaction with their union at all?
Not their union, but their agents. We had actually left some messages for him to contact us, but there was so much going on down there at that time that they were just all very busy and very stretched thin down there. So I didn't talk to the union, the Border Patrol union. We tried to reach out to them, but we spoke to so many agents down there. And, it, first of all, I wish he would have, I wish he would have gone a step further, because it's, it's first of all, it is a blatant lie that that Texas or Governor Abbott isn't allowing the Border Patrol to do their job. But the other part of that truth is that, or the truth that Governor Abbott absolutely wants the Border Patrol to do their job, is that it's the Biden administration that is misusing the Border Patrol to actually help transport and release all these illegals into the United States, which has never historically been the Border Patrol's job before. And the agents that's one of their pet peeves, or one of their biggest frustrations, is that they are being made complicit in helping these illegals sit there and get into the United States, and they've basically become glorified transport officers, right? And that's one of the phrases that they used with me, is that they're like, we're just basically now the federal government's taxi drivers to ferry these illegals around, right? And that is their biggest frustration, because historically they were there to stop the illegals coming in, and to detain them and then deport them to Mexico, or back to their country of origin. And that's just not happening anymore. That's completely done, right? So now so many of them are being taken off of the line to sit there and process the incredible amount of paperwork that comes with processing these illegals for release into the United States, right?
You know what I just thought
And
of? Like,
go
what
ahead.
if you're one of these border agents that you process an individual, and then you see that's the guy that killed Lake and
Right,
Riley, or
right,
any of these people? Because I know
right.
she's getting a lot of the publicity, but there's been a lot of murders and rapes. Like, I can't even imagine the PTSD that these agents are
And
experiencing, knowing like I let that guy in and then he went and killed an innocent girl, you know?
and that's one of the things that was brought up, is that the agents I spoke with told me that it's not like they have actual proof. They have actual proof that these children that they're releasing, some of them are going into child sex trafficking rings, some of them are going into cartel narcotics trafficking rings. So they know that their actions are partly helping to do this, right? They're helping this take place. And yes, they are very stressed out. They're very frustrated. And unfortunately, many of them are put in a position, and I think we touched on this a little bit last time, to choose, do they give up a 12, 13, 14, 15-year career when they're close to retirement because of their morals, and take the impact on the financial impact on their families, their own families, or do they just sit there and kind of turn a blind eye, so to speak, right? And I know
Right.
to a lot of listeners, they're going to say, listen, that's an easy choice. I would quit before I do that. But it's not that easy when you're in it, and when your whole career has been geared toward law enforcement, right? And you really can't, when you're in it, when you first, you a lot of officers, and I'm sure you know this, right? When you're actually doing the job, you can't even imagine doing anything else, because you're just that's your identity almost, right? And it's not necessarily always healthy, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's just one of the natural side effects of working in that kind of profession. And I tell people all the time, it took me about 2, 3 years to lose my law enforcement identity after I left, because I didn't even realize how ingrained in me it was until I stepped away from it, and had been away from it for 2, 3 years, right? So it's not an easy decision for these folks. And the other thing is, in federal law enforcement especially, right, that they know that every 4 years, their entire method of operation may change, because a new president comes in, and suddenly there's totally different orders being passed down, right?
Hmm.
And these agents, especially if they've been there for 2 or 3 administrations already, they know this. So a lot of them also feel, well, we just got to hold on. We just got to hold on until the next election. And then if the right president gets in, we won't be asked to do this kind of stuff anymore. Right. So I'm not an apologist for these agents, but I just want people listening to understand that it's not as simple as, oh, I'm being told to do something that I don't agree with, I should just walk away. I know it sounds easy on the outside to say that, but it's not always that way in reality.
Right.
No, and I wanna say something on that because obviously that's what I did. But I was in a very unique position that I did not have a family to support, did not have kids, and so it was a decision that I made solely with only taking care of myself in mind, and quite honestly, I I miss law enforcement. I mean, I haven't
Right.
had the same passion for any career ever since. Like that, I thought that was going to be it till the end, but
Right.
not everybody can make this choice. So
Right.
I I totally get that, and I still have a ton of prior coworkers that are in that similar position, working in cities with governments that don't support them, but they
Right.
have families, and it's like,
Right.
how do you leave?
Right.
Especially now in Joe Biden's America, like you can't just
Yeah.
quit
Right.
your job. I mean, how are you going to survive? But yeah, I hope
Right.
that didn't come across that I think the border agents are
No,
doing
no,
anything
no, no,
wrong,
no,
because like
no.
I feel for them, because what are you
I
supposed to
do. Yeah.
do? And I'm sure just like us, they're betting that Trump's going to get back in and things are going to
Right.
change, you know?
Right.
Um so, okay, I got to ask this just, and if you don't feel comfortable sharing like your political beliefs around it or whatever, that's fine. But like when Abbott brought in the National Guard, um, it's great because it's like getting that area under control. But what makes my like conspiracy brain go like, what the hell, is ever since that happened, now all of a sudden it kind of gives Biden an opportunity to be like, oh, well, we're going to put this bill together. Oh, and now it's the Republicans that don't want. And he's like trying to flip the script. And I think the American public is like smart enough to see what's happening. But do you think it like almost from a political standpoint is like helping Biden more than before when like the border was just wide open?
Well, I would say this. Images on TV of millions of people flooding across, and I use the example, for example, with the 15,000 Haitians underneath the international bridge in Del Rio. Yeah, that doesn't look good for a president in an election year, right? But Abbott had a very tough choice to make, to get this thing spun up with the National Guard, and that was the Biden administration didn't seem interested at all to slow the flow down.
No.
And, so in fact, they were helping it, right?
Mhm.
And what we didn't know at the time, what we did not know until 3 days ago, 4 days ago, is that while this surge was going on, the Biden administration intended to stop those images on TV, but not by stopping the humanity coming across the border. They just didn't want that negative coverage. So what the plan that they came up with that just came out in a Freedom of Information lawsuit is they decided to charter US jets and go to foreign countries and pick the illegals up in their home countries and fly them into the US and release them. And they did that with 320,000 illegals in 2023 alone, ostensibly because they didn't want them making the dangerous journey across the border. So the U.S. government decided we'll just smuggle them in ourselves, and that way they're safe to come into the U.S. Right? But that's not the case, right? We know it wasn't for their safety. They didn't want those images of TV of 500,000 to 1 million trying to come across at once. And so they came up with this plan to charter these flights and spread them out around 43 airports in the United States.
How is this
And
not proof of treason? You
well,
know,
and that's what I was just going to say. And that, in my view, that is treason because you went and picked them up in violation of U.S. immigration laws, right? And you sat there and flew them directly into the United States and released them, right? With no vetting, with no idea who these people are. And you just put them on chartered jets, flew them in and released them. And to me, that is treason. That is absolute treason. And to do it secretly, right?
yeah.
Without any American citizens knowing that this was being done. So, when people talk about the numbers, right? They're like, oh, we estimate during the Biden administration somewhere between 8 to 10 million illegals came into the United States. Yeah, but that's 500,000 right there that we didn't know about, right?
Right.
So, we are looking at numbers that really we have never seen. And I really suspect the numbers are probably close to around 14 to 15 million that have come in during the Biden administration. And, I made a post on Facebook the other day. I went out to our lake here in Texas where I live. It's called Lake Travis. And right now, Lake Travis is at 38% full. That's how low the lake is. All you see out there is pretty much dirt more than, right?
Mhm.
And this lake feeds into the Colorado River, and it also provides water for rice farmers downstream. And they've had to drastically reduce the water, right? And it touches on what we talked about last time, and that is this is not about who these illegals are. I don't care whether they're from Africa or Honduras or Central America or China, although those all bring their own problems as far as, well, is China infiltrating agents? Well, we have illegals that have gone through the Darien Gap who have literally given interviews and said, absolutely, the CCP is infiltrating agents in these groups and that they have to be very careful who they speak to so that they're not reported, right? So there comes problems with that. But the real issue, and the point that I'm trying to make is we have limited resources in our country, right? That's where we're at now. We have limited water supply. We have an electric, grid that's hanging on by its nails, okay? And when a child is born here in the United States, that child doesn't truly add a significant draw onto the system until that child becomes an adult, right? I mean, it uses less electricity, it uses less water, it uses less all
Right.
these resources, right? But when you go out and you import millions of adults and instantly add them to the system to draw the resources, that you can't plan for that, and you can't gradually increase your infrastructure as needed based on your population because your population is literally changing overnight. And,
Mhm.
Yeah.
this is what people who are pro illegals coming across, they don't understand that the impact that this is having and how unsustainable it is. We
Right.
can't keep doing this because we're going to have a collapse in this country.
I was talking the other day with my friend who is an immigrant from Brazil, and I never bring up the border because I didn't know what her political views are. But she was like fuming the other day. She was so pissed. And she was like, Stephanie, like, I can't tell you how upset I am. And I was like, what's going on? And she's like, we have a legal system here. She's like, I went through the legal system. I had to wait. I had to pay thousands of dollars. I had to come here and work and pay taxes and get health insurance. And she's been going through all sorts of health issues. And she had a surgery recently. She got a bill for $100,000. And she's like,
Mm,
I have to pay that. I am responsible for that because
right,
I came here legally. And she's like, and
right,
now I'm hearing that all of these illegals are not only getting free health care so they can go
right,
have their surgeries, but they're getting free housing, free, education, free childcare, free food. And she was pissed. And she was saying, like, through the grapevine of her people that are all still friends with people coming over, that people are like, oh, yeah, we should just go back home, visit, and come in illegally under a different name. And
right,
I was blown away. So she was like so pro, like, we have to get Trump in office. And this is coming from someone who is an immigrant. And it's like, I think people need to see that side of it. We have a legal system. People forget
right,
that. And, Biden today could implement those laws instead of
right,
ignoring them, like he reversed all of Trump's. So
right.
I just had to bring that up because it was good to hear from someone who's actually been through it and how unfair it is to them that do the right thing.
I have yet to meet a single legal immigrant that is pro illegal immigration. Not a single one.
Yeah.
And I know many of them. My wife is a legal immigrant, right?
Mhm.
And she has the exact same viewpoint. She's furious, right? Like absolutely furious. And I don't know if I touched on this in our last podcast or not, but when we had our first child, 12 years ago, when we had our first son, her sister in the Philippines was going to college at the time, and she wanted her sister to come over and see our newborn son. And so her sister went to the consulate there in the Philippines, and they denied her a visa. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh, there's got to be a mistake. This girl, she's just going to college. She's never been in trouble. And it's just like for a tourist visa. We're not talking about to live here. We're talking about just to come over to visit for 2 weeks, right? So I said, listen, no. There's been a mistake. Make another appointment, go back in, explain the situation, right? And I wrote her a letter, and I wrote an introductory letter, and kind of explained who I was, and at the time I was working at the embassy in Afghanistan, right? And I had a clearance, and so she went a second time and she got denied. And I mean, these interviews were like 2 minutes, right? She'd walk in, they wouldn't even hear her out. So now I got so mad, I called the consulate in the Philippines and I said, hey, I'm a contractor for the US State Department and I have a security clearance and I work for the ambassador, the US ambassador in Afghanistan. And I am personally guaranteeing that this woman will only come for 2 weeks and then she will go back home to the Philippines. And what they told me on the telephone was, we do not speak to family members of visa applicants. Don't call here again. And then they hung up on me. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
So then I wrote a letter to the consulate in the Philippines and I got an automated response. If your correspondence is in relation to a visa applicant, we do not read this type of correspondence. It is shredded and destroyed. This is now
Unbelievable.
this is how they treat American citizens that are working for the U.S. government. They're like, we don't want to hear it. No, your family member's not coming here to visit you just because you had a baby. But 12 million illegal come
Yep, come
across the
right in.
border. Yep, we got free housing, free education, everything for you. Just come on down, right? And I can't tell you how mad my wife was. Because she was like, what is going on? And it literally, and I joke about this, but, my wife had no exposure to the U.S. Political system, right? She didn't know a Democrat from a Republican when she got here. And it was just going through experiences like that within a year, she literally looked at me one day and she said, I got to tell you, uh, I don't understand what's going on in this country. These Democrats, are these people stupid? Like what is going on with these
Yeah.
people, right? So within a year, like she wanted a CCW, she wanted a concealed carry permit. She was a Republican. Like within a year, she was a Republican. But again, this is somebody who never grew up under our political system, who just came in this country, looked around at what was going on and said, well, I'm weighing these two sides and I can't make any sense of what this side is doing, based on my personal experiences. They won't even let my sister come over here, right, to visit me to see my newborn child, but they're letting millions of illegals walk right across that border, right? And so, yeah, I agree with that, that no legal immigrant wants illegal immigration.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, I have to bring up a story because you talked about them chartering these flights. So I got to tell you about this because I think we talked last time how I know like a lot of people are against TikTok, but this is the only place where I get information. It's like the dark web, okay? Like
Right.
the stuff that's normally censored.
Right.
So anyhow, I all the time, I see videos of people that are in the airport on like these red eye flights, where there's hardly anyone in the airport, and they're videoing groups of children that don't speak English with like one or two men.
Right.
And so they'll go up and start questioning the guys, like, what are you doing? Who are these kids? And they're like, we can't answer that. We can't answer that. And then they'll go and get security and the TSA agents, and the TSA agents are like, there's nothing we can do. And they just let it happen. So I've been seeing this for a while, right? Well, this week I see this woman posting what happened to her. She had video of the whole thing. A mom with her 4-year-old son. It was a late night flight. And a security agent comes up to her out of the blue. She's getting her bags, and he's saying, is that your real child? Because someone made a complaint saying that they think you're human trafficking this child. And she was like,
Wow.
what? Yeah, like it's my child. I have his birth certificate. Like,
Right.
and she
Right.
was freaked out because
Right.
she's like, it was so unexpected. And they tell you don't have to bring your birth certificate if you're flying
Right.
domestically. So she was like trying to be really nice and cordial. But afterwards, she posted a video and she was like, I was terrified they were going to take my kid away. And she's like, I am a frequent flyer, to the point that she had free tickets on Southwest because she flies
Right.
with them so much. She had a ticket for her son. She's like, they could go on my social media and see my entire
Right.
birth story. And they interrogated her and scared the crap out of her. And she had to like call her husband middle of the night. He had to go and find the birth certificate and like fax it over. Yet they're allowing these whole groups of kids
Right.
to come through the airport. So that blew my mind right there, because I'm like, okay, this is how American citizens are being treated. And this is how these people are being treated. And it made me scared to ever fly with my kids,
Right.
you know?
Well, we documented that on video in the McAllen International Airport back in 2021. We documented these handlers, and you and I we touched on this in the podcast, where that the driver from the Catholic Charities RVG down in the Rio Grande Valley would take these kids, drop them off at the airport, and go inside, get their tickets, and then escort them to the security checkpoint. And they had a special little lane that they would open up to get them around security, with the Border Patrol agent and TSA agent standing right there. And they would literally take them around the security checkpoint to their gate. Right. And these were groups of teenagers and kids with one handler. And we filmed this and documented this. It's on the YouTube channel um, in 2021 already. So this has been going on, and the disparity, it's like you brought up, right, where Americans have to justify who their children are, but these people can go across. But not only that, from a security standpoint, when you or I fly, right, we have to go onto the TSA lane. We have to show them identification. These illegals now, there is literally a sign at the checkpoint. If you are undocumented, let a TSA agent know so they can basically give you a special screening procedure and allow you in without ID, right? And this is at every airport now that TSA has been briefed that they cannot stop them from going to their gates, even though they have zero government ID. Now,
Could be a
think about that from
terrorist.
a security. Exactly. Think about that from a security. Somewhere up there, there's terrorists in other countries looking at this going, well, they just made it easy for us. Like, we can actually go and get on the plane, right, with no ID. I mean, think about this, right? This is incredible that American citizens are still being subjected to the kind of scrutiny that we are every time we fly, but that literally 10 to 15 million illegals in the last 3 years have had to produce zero ID, zero.
Yeah, and they can create any name they want. They can. Oh, he's gone. Oh, we lost Tim.
Oh no, the storm
There's
probably
a
went through.
Yeah, there's a thunderstorm in Texas right now where he is. So we'll give it a second.
At least the lake will fill up if there's a storm, like he was talking about a
Yeah,
drought. Oh man,
crazy.
it is crazy though. It makes you angry, you
Yeah.
know? It's just like American citizens are like second class citizens to these people that are coming in the wrong way. It's maddening.
Yeah, well, we had talked about that TSA thing a few weeks
Mhm.
ago. And I think
Yeah.
at the time it was like a pilot program in just a few airports, but it sounds like now it's pretty much going everywhere. So,
Well, yeah, and again, like it's to me that all this is like treason. I just
yeah.
don't
Oh,
understand how they get
100%.
away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Hi, guys. Am I back?
you're
You're back.
back.
Did
Oh,
the
I'm
storm
sorry,
roll
guys.
roll
Like I
in?
said, we've been having power issues here. We've had a storm roll through here, and we've been having power issues. It's just absolutely crazy. But yeah, and that's exactly true, right? It is treason when you subject this country and its citizens to that kind of danger of terrorism, and you do it knowingly. Knowingly, it's not like the top officials of Homeland Security don't have the brain cells to figure out, oh, this could be a potential problem. Absolutely, they know what kind of problem it is, but they have their marching orders from the White House to ignore the very real danger that they know this causes and this can produce, to sit there and fuel this agenda to fundamentally change the demographics and the voter base of this country. And that's really what this is all about.
Well, yeah, and that's why the Democrats have pushed so hard to not have identification when you go to vote.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
why they've got what,
Absolutely.
15 million people now that can vote.
Right. Right. Just in the last 3 years alone. Right.
Yeah.
So besides all the other illegals that are already here, right, which, by
Right.
conservative estimates was around 25 to 30 million, so that are still undocumented before this new surge arrived when Biden took over. So, we're talking about 45 to 50 million minimum in this country right now, with every single day 10,000 more coming across. And it's just not sustainable. I keep using that word, but it's really true. There is no infrastructure in the world that can keep up with that many adults being added in every single day indefinitely. It's literally going to cause an economic collapse. It's going to cause a collapse of our natural resources in this country.
Well,
Mhm.
especially when you look at that in the context of what Biden's already trying to do with getting rid of our natural energy resources, getting rid
Right.
of oil and gas, getting rid of farming. We're not going to have the agriculture to sustain this. We're not going to have the
Right.
electrical grid. Like, this is a diabolical plan all the way around.
It is. It is. And it's scary when you think about like I said, I've got a 7-year-old, 11-year-old right now. And, when I think about their future in 25, 30 years from now, if this isn't stopped, right, it's going to be a real problem. It's going to be a real problem in this country. And the second thing is this, right? Look at some of these protests that we're having right now, right? Like the pro-Palestinian protests, right? They have literally shut down highways. They have gone to government buildings, cut down the U.S. flag, and replaced it with the Palestinian flag, right? I mean, the other issue in this is that unlike 50, 60 years ago, when even some illegal immigrants who would come across, they wanted to chase the American dream. They came here for the opportunity, right, to sit there, work hard, and create something and build something, right? And they wanted nothing more than to become American citizens, right? Because they bought in to the opportunity and what this country was all about. But the people that are coming across now, you can interview them. They could care less about the United States. They have no loyalty to this country. What they care about is what can this country give me? And by the way, it's not just here in the US. You can go to Europe and interview any illegal over there in Europe, and they are literally rioting over there because there was just, you just saw in the Irish Parliament, right, the other day, they stormed the Irish Parliament. But this is happening all over Europe, right, where they're having riots demanding more money, demanding more free housing, demanding more cash allowance, and all these different things, right? And so, what you're setting yourself up for in this country eventually is a civil war
Yep.
because these people have no loyalty to this country. So, they don't care if this country is destroyed. They don't care as long as, they are very transactional in their approach. As long as you can keep them happy by giving them free things, they're happy and they'll go along to get along. But the minute you say, no, 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 you have to work like everybody else and there's no freebies, then you're going to start seeing the riots here in the United States, right? And then what do you think the Biden administration is going to do when there's 500,000 or 1,000,000 illegals rioting? You think he's going to send in the National Guard to sit there and attack illegals that he helped bring into the United States? Probably not, right? So it's a very dangerous combination that's not going to end well if we don't get a change in administrations and get a grip on what's going on with this illegal immigration.
Well, yeah, and you brought up the Palestinian protests, and that was exactly like fear like set in immediately because it was within 24 hours that every major city had the streets filled with these
Right,
protesters. And I
right,
was like, they organized so fast. It
right.
was like it's like army, a whole army of people. And how many more people are that? Like that was just, Palestinian protesters. Like who knows about, like all of the illegal Chinese men that have come over. And
Right.
it's like, can our military even compete with that? Because we're talking about millions of people that have come over. And I
Well, if
mean that
anybody, yeah,
it's
go
crazy.
ahead. Yeah. Well, if anybody doubts that, what we're saying, you can look at the BLM protests. Look, they took over police stations, right?
Yeah.
They took over police stations in Seattle. They took over police station in Minneapolis, right? Like, I was right here in Austin when, the police chief came out and issued a statement and called and said and told these protesters, listen, we're going to protest with you. We feel you. This was during the George Floyd riots, right? And the Austin police chief came out and said, listen to the protesters. He said, listen, we're going to protest with you. And he kneeled down in front of police headquarters, right? With a group of officers, kneeled with the protesters, thinking that that would save his headquarters. Well, it almost got overrun.
Yeah.
They stormed the building, and the cops literally had their backs up against the front doors, like trying to keep them back. They cut down the U.S. and Texas flag from the flagpole in front of police headquarters, right? And then they completely shut down I-35, the major interstate running through Austin. The protesters completely took that over, right? And when the police finally tried to regain control and tried to clear I-35 and used less lethal munitions, the district attorney here in Austin indicted 17 officers for using less lethal munitions to try to clear that freeway, right? So, and this was a small microcosm. And like you said, this was maybe, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 protesters here. But like you said, they organized so fast and so quickly. And they did the same thing in Chaz in Seattle. They did the same thing in Minneapolis. And with social media nowadays, you can mobilize 1 million people within a couple hours. There is no police force or military, like you said, that can mobilize that quickly to deal with a crowd that large, right? And that's what I'm saying. We are setting ourselves up for some real problems, right? And just think for a minute. Those pro-Palestinian protesters that we saw in every city, they chose to protest this time. They chose to protest at government buildings and things like that. Imagine if 500,000 people just decided to go through a suburb.
Yeah.
500,000 people through a suburb, right? And just
Yep.
decided we're going to start kicking in doors and breaking windows, right? And smashing cars, right? Look at Oakland right now. You see it all the time down there, right? They're burning cars, right? I mean, it's just, that city is just lost, right? It's just a lost city at this point, right? And that's what we're heading toward in this country, right? And it's scary. It really is, right? And I say that, like I said, from a background of, I spent a lot of time in foreign countries where civil war was a way of life. And the last thing I would want to see is that happening to our country, the destruction and mayhem that brings, right? But if you import millions upon millions of people who don't have loyalty to this country and are just here for what this country can give them, what do you think the end result is when something happens that displeases them?
Yeah, and it's not just the lack of loyalty, and Stephanie and I have talked about this on previous episodes. It's the cultural difference. In America, we are
100%.
we are soft. Like, this country has not dealt with any kind
Right.
of crisis on our soil pretty much
Right.
in anyone's lifetime. These people are all coming from countries where there's consistent conflict and war and brutality, and their mentality is 100% different than Americans.
Right. Look, we weren't prepared for a fake pandemic.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the panic that set in with toilet paper and well, the average American, you turn the water off for 3 days and their local grocery stores doesn't sell any food and watch the panic set in, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, and unfortunately that can happen very easily. And we have to take that serious. And you're right, the commitment that I saw several interviews with illegal immigrants from Senegal, right? They were all these young military guys, and they all admitted that they had either served in the Senegal military or in the militias that were fighting over there. And so you're getting guys who are already coming over with combat experience. Combat experience. They already know how to use an AK-47. They already know how to do small unit tactics. They already know these things. And if they mobilize, and again, I'm 100% pro Second Amendment. What I'm anti illegals coming over and being able to purchase weapons or being able to carry weapons. Because again, that privilege and that right was given to American citizens, right? And unfortunately, though, we do know it's very easy to obtain weapons in this country, right? If you want a gun, you can obtain a gun. So it's not going to take long for any of these illegals who choose to arm themselves. I mean, we see it every day, right? When the police arrest an illegal, many of them are armed, right? Many of them are carrying guns. And now the LAPD is issuing they're issuing weapons to illegals, right?
Yeah,
To
they're
officers who are not
hiring.
American citizens,
Yeah,
right?
hiring
And
illegals.
right.
Mhm.
And think about the precedents that sets where a non-American citizen is policing an American citizen,
Right.
right? And telling them what they can and can't do under the color of law, right?
It's like a takeover.
And exactly, and that's just the first city to do so. So now imagine when that spreads to other progressive cities, and you have police forces who more and more then become a third, a half illegals, right? Think about that. Think about the impact of that on American citizens.
Yep.
Or if the military does that, starts hiring illegals.
Well, the military's always accepted illegals for traditionally, historically, right? But the difference is that they offered them a fast track to citizenship by serving in the U.S. military. But that usually came with a price, and that is you had to serve, right? And there is just a difference when you're taking into an institution like the U.S. military, and you're sent to fight in a war and things like that, right? That loyalty that we talked about, that bond for country, that actually develops pretty quickly under fire, right? Like if you're in a war zone and you got to sit there and do what you have to do for your brothers, right? I had a criminal justice teacher in college. His name was Dr. Tony Barrio. At one point, he was the #1 polygraph examiner in the world, right? Like just very well known. He was used by the CIA, DEA, all over the world to do polygraphs and things. And his story was very, early 1950s. He came over, and at the time, he was by Ellis Island, and an Army recruiter came in and said, and he was actually going to get deported back to Cuba. And an Army recruiter came in and said, "Who here wants to become an American citizen?" And a number of them raised their hands, and they're like, "Okay, go in this line over here. You're going in the U.S. Army, and you're going to Korea." And he was sent to Korea during the Korean War, and had to survive over there. But again, he sacrificed. He made a sacrifice to become a U.S. citizen. And the illegals that are coming across now, that's not what they're doing, right? They're not giving back to our country. They're just taking. And there's a very big difference in that. And again, I'm not saying every single illegal, but many, many, many more. The takers now are in the majority compared to the people who are coming here to truly give back for the opportunity that they're provided, right? And because in the past we've never had the government and cities, throw millions upon millions of dollars at them, right? Like in New York now, or they're going to get a debit card, they're going to get free housing, if they agree to move to another state, they'll get free housing in that state for a year, paid for by New York City, just so that they'll leave New York City. Mayor Adams will pay their rent, for a year, right? So I mean, think about that, right? That's never happened before, and the real issue with that is when these illegals, when other foreigners in other countries hear this, and they're like, "Wait a minute, free rent in the United States for a year, free food, free health care, and free education? Hey, Rosita, pack your bags. We're going to the Darien Gap, and we're going up to the border, right?" And so as long as there's an incentive like that, right, where they don't have to work and they're just going to be provided for, why wouldn't you go to a country like that? But for us, the reality is 34, where are we at? 34, 35 trillion in debt. We're adding $1 trillion in debt every 100 days in this country now. $1 trillion every 100 days. How is that sustainable? How long before our economy can no longer print money at will at that rate, before it literally affects our credit rating around the world, before it affects inflation, before it affects everything, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the real issues that Americans are going to have to take a hard look at during this election and make a decision on what do they want the future of this country to look like.
If there even is a future. Like, I think it's so dire that that's what people need to look at, like our national security and our economy, because like you said, it's not sustainable. If we keep going this route, there won't be a country left. It's really
Not one that we'll
scary.
recognize. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
That's very true.
Tim, is there anything, I feel like we talked about so many different topics. Is there anything else that you wanted people to know before we let you go? Anything
Yeah,
that's
I
come
think
up?
one of the things that I've learned when I went down to Eagle Pass, and what we did, we didn't just like go to Camp Shelby. Like, we drove along the border many miles outside of Eagle Pass and really kind of looked at the border for ourselves, right? Like, once you get outside the checkpoints, the border patrol checkpoints and things like that. And what's important for Americans to know is the border is literally wide open, right? And so when Americans hear, oh, well, Governor Abbott is putting the National Guard down there, so that's good, right? It's like, literally visualize a drop of water in the Atlantic Ocean. That's what putting the National Guard on the border is like. And so when I talked to the National Guard commander down there, um, I asked him about that. I said, listen, we drove outside the city, and there's no barriers, there's nothing, and there's no border patrol, there's no National Guard, there's no anything. Like, it's just wide open. Anybody can just, like, get a little inner tube and float across the river and come up on the other side. And I said, so how are you handling that? Like, why isn't there more being done away from the checkpoints? And he was very honest, and he said, well, that's a good question. He said, but here's the reality: we have very limited resources. We only have X amount of troops. And so what we have to do is we have to look at the most likely crossing points that are easiest for the most amount of illegals to traverse. And he said, historically, that is where the water is low or where it's not fast moving. And so we have to kind of surge our resources there. And he said, but really, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. We'll put our troops there, but then the cartels see us there. And on the other side of the border, they just hold the immigrants and then go find another crossing spot and move them over there. And then by the time we realize there's another surge going on, 20 miles upriver or downriver, then we have to change all our operations. We have to surge more people to that area. And he's like, so it's literally like playing a game of whack-a-mole. And that is what the American citizens have to know. When the Biden administration tries to say the border is unsecure, I would say travel down to the border and look for yourself. I've seen secure borders growing up in Germany. Back then the wall was up between East and West Germany, and I can tell you that was a secure border, right? I think 400 people from the 1960s, when the wall was built, until the wall came down in 1989. I think 460 people might have successfully made it across in all those years, in 20 years, right? That's a secure border, right? Our U.S. border is completely wide open, and it cannot stay that way if we're going to survive as a country. That's what I think American citizens need to know. And if they doubt what I'm saying, then I would encourage them to go down to the U.S. border and look for themselves.
Well said.
I
Well
have one last question, Tim, because I've never been able to get her name out of my mind. What happened with Sister Norma Pimentel?
Yep, she's operating more than ever, and
She's still there.
she's there, and they've expanded their operations. They've got a new facility, even bigger. They are happily moving right along and still processing thousands of illegals every single day.
Wow.
And I'm sure she's still providing young women to people that want to come by there and get them, right. And it's really funny, like if I took a video when we were in Eagle Pass. They had an NGO down there. It was called Mission Border Hope, is the NGO that was operating in Eagle Pass, right? That was housing the illegals and ferrying them by buses and taking them to airports and all that. And when we walked up, I'm talking about, there was a long driveway. This driveway was probably about 50 yards long from the street to the gate of this NGO, right? And we didn't get halfway down that driveway before armed security officers came out of that gate and said, "Hey, this is private property. You have to leave right now." And they had
Wow.
really tall fencing that you couldn't see through all around the facility, right? And so there was a check cashing place next door, right? Like a currency exchange, like you see in many border towns. They exchange, currency if you want to go over to Mexico or vice versa, and they cash checks. And so I went and I stood on the property of the check cashing place, and the security guard said, "I said you need to leave. This is private property." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. You work for the NGO, right?" And they're like, "Yes." I'm like, "Well, I'm on the premises of this check cashing place." And they said, "We own that too."
Oh, wow.
An NGO, and you own a currency exchange facility,
You can't make
right?
this shit up, you
You
know?
cannot
Yeah.
make it up, right? And the really funny part was, so right next door to the NGO was the Eagle Pass Police Department. And so, and I have this all on video, by the way, but so the security guard and me are in this verbal exchange, and she's like, "You're going to leave or I'm going to call the police." And I said, "You know what? I really think you should do that. I would love for a police officer to come over here and explain this situation to me. First of all, what do you have to hide as an NGO? I'm not understanding. What is so secretive going on behind those walls that you have to have armed security? And just the fact that we're standing outside in a driveway filming, that is causing you to threaten me with arrest." But then I really want the police department to explain how an NGO is claiming that a check cashing place next door belongs to them as well,
Right.
right? And of course, they never called the police, right? So they never took me up on that challenge. But yeah, it's Sister Normantel, Pimentel. She's still going strong, and unfortunately, NGOs all along the border are making millions of dollars off this human trafficking. And that is the unfortunate truth, right? They are anything but non-governmental organizations. At this point, they're working hand in hand with the Biden administration to smuggle as many illegals into this country as humanly possible.
You need to like go undercover and tell her that you need some women to come work in your restaurant like that one guy
Right.
did and get the whole
Yeah.
thing on
Yeah.
video.
No, that's actually true. Yeah, we should probably follow up on that. And it's mind-boggling to me that we posted that video of that gentleman from Chicago going up to Sister Norma, and that whole exchange we kind of videoed. And it's amazing to me that was posted on social media, and with all the scrutiny that the FBI and other government organizations have on crimes being committed online, nobody ever followed up on that. Nobody from the federal law enforcement ever said, "Wait a minute, what? They
Yeah.
offered to give him women to take to his restaurant in Chicago? Like, wait, whoa, what's going on here?" Nobody.
Right.
It's like, no, not a problem, not a crime.
Yeah.
And again, the implications of that, of how many women and children are now being trafficked because of these policies by this administration, it's frightening. It really is.
It's like the crime of the century. I mean, it is. It's total treason, in my opinion.
I
I
agree. I
I
agree
don't
with
know
that.
why
And I
more
don't
people
use
don't
that
see
word
that.
lightly, but in this case,
Right.
it applies 100%.
Yeah. Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on. It's always
Absolutely.
so good to hear from you and to get that firsthand experience. Is there anywhere that people can follow you or
No,
anything
like I
you want
like
to
I said
leave?
last time, I don't do this for any kind of attention or anything. I I don't even know. I might have added, yeah, I think I might have added some videos from Eagle Pass to the YouTube channel. I think I changed it to Border Crisis 2024. So you can go there and see some of the latest videos. That's where we had the videos that we took in 2021 when we were down in McAllen, Texas. Um, But nowadays there's so many people out there doing great work, exposing this. We've got independent journalists literally traveling to the Darien Gap where these illegals are coming through, and literally joining the caravan and filming within that caravan and showing all the human side of that, and how many people are dying, how many people are being raped, robbed, along the journey, and all this stuff. And the UN camps that are now being set up in all these foreign countries to assist in this smuggling operation. That's another thing Americans need to know, is that the UN is knee deep in this, right? They are
They're
100%
paying people,
supporting
right?
this. Yes, absolutely. And so, and then, even if you're, let's say, even if you're on the opposite political spectrum, let's say you're a Democrat, right? And you're a pro-Biden guy, right? But you want what's best for this country. And I'm not saying those two things are necessarily in agreement, but let's just say, for instance, you have to ask yourself, what would the UN and China's motivation be in assisting millions of people to come into this country illegally? What would be the purpose of that? Just ask yourself that objectively, right? Not from I'm pro illegal immigration, or anti illegal immigration, or I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. Just ask yourself, why would a entity like the UN set up huge camps in foreign countries and provide resources for as many people as possible to flood into the United States, not into any other country, just the United States, right? And ask yourself what their possible motivation for that could be, and then arrive at your own conclusions.
Yep. Well said. Well, thank you so much again for coming
It's
on.
been great. I always enjoy coming on. So it's an
Yeah.
important topic, and especially
Yeah,
this
our
year
audience
because
loves hearing from you.
Yeah. All right. Well, you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking with you guys again in the future.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Tim.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take
Tim.
care. All right. Bye-bye.